The first time I saw her, she looked like a shadow in the dim evening light. She was thin and tired, the effects of hunger evident in the way her ribs showed through her dull, tangled fur. Her green eyes, filled with a mix of fear and hope, caught my attention. Although I wasn't particularly fond of cats, something about her made me stop. Without really thinking, I placed a bowl of food on the ground. She quickly gobbled it up, then darted into the darkness. The next morning, she was back. This time, she had 4 tiny kittens with her. My heart raced at the sight. What had I gotten into? I stood at the door, the cool morning air completely forgotten. Willow, that's what I decided to call her, looked up at me, her expression a blend of cautious familiarity and concern. She curled protectively around the small, trembling bodies at her side, their fur still damp from the dew. They barely moved, just making the smallest of squirming motions, their eyes still closed to the world outside. A lump formed in my throat. I had no idea how to care for kittens, how to feed them or keep them safe. Part of me wanted to reach out for help, but who would I call? The nearest animal shelter was quite far, and I doubted they would take them. Willow let out a soft, raspy meow, bringing my focus back to her. Was she asking for more food, or perhaps for assistance? I stepped back inside, grabbing the same plate I had used the night before and filling it with scraps from my fridge, some shred chicken and a bit of tuna. As soon as I set it down, she hunched over it, eating quickly but always keeping an eye on her kittens. I crouched down and cautiously reached out my hand, but she stiffened. It wasn't a warning, it was uncertainty. She trusted me enough to come to my door with her babies, but her hesitation made me realize that trust has its limits. In that moment, I felt just as uncertain as she did. The morning air was calm, but my mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. I settled onto the porch, watching this fragile family that had found their way to me. Willow's thin body wrapped around her kittens, her tail draping protectively over them like a blanket. They nuzzled against her for warmth, their fur so soft it felt almost unreal. The sight stirred something within me, an emotion that danced between wonder and worry. I found myself facing an unexpected challenge, caring for a stray mother cat and her newborn kittens who had taken refuge on my doorstep. I wasn't familiar with cats and hadn't anticipated becoming responsible for them, but walking away wasn't an option. I pulled out my phone and considered who might be able to help. The nearest shelter was far away, and the thought of leaving them somewhere unfamiliar didn't sit well with me. After a moment, I decided to call Mrs. Callahan, my elderly neighbor. She had lived in our town longer than I had been alive and seemed to know everything about it. When she answered after just 2 rings, her voice was warm and laced with curiosity, as if she sensed something unusual was happening. As I explained the situation, I heard a pause followed by her knowing chuckle. Willow has been around for months, but she's never let anyone close, she said. There was an unmistakable tone in her voice, perhaps admiration or even a sense of relief. But she trusts you, she added simply. Those words lingered in my mind, and for the first time that day, I felt the weight of responsibility shift into something more profound. Before I could gather my thoughts, Mrs. Callahan's tone grew firm and reassuring. Stay where you are, I'm coming over. After we hung up, I looked back at Willow, who met my gaze with her steady green eyes. It was clear she had made a choice. Whether I was ready for it or not, this was my new reality. In just 15 minutes, Mrs. Callahan arrived, her old sedan kicking up dust as it pulled into my driveway. She stepped out with a purpose that came from years of knowing just what to do, her cardigan wrapped tightly against the morning chill. Without a moment's hesitation, she walked up the porch steps and knelt beside Willow, her movements slow but assured. Her lined hands hovered above the mother cat, giving her a chance to react, but Willow merely flicked her ears, acknowledging the presence without fear. She's thinner than I expected, Mrs. Callahan observed, tilting her head as she studied the cat. And the kittens, goodness, they can't be more than a day or 2 old. She glanced at me, and her expression shifted from calm observation to something more serious. You know what this means, don't you? I shook my head. What? She sighed and settled back on her heels. She didn't just bring them to you because she trusts you. She brought them because she can't do this alone. She's exhausted, Daniel. If you hadn't fed her yesterday, She might not have had the strength to care for them at all. Her words settled heavily in my mind, almost like a dawning realization. I had just thought I was feeding a hungry cat, but it turned out to be more than that. I wasn't merely a stop along the way for her. I was her only chance at help. As I took a deep breath, rubbing my neck, I let Mrs. Callahan's words sink in further. Willow hadn't chosen my porch for convenience. She had come to me because she had nowhere else to turn. That thought was both illuminating and daunting. I had assumed she was capable of looking after her kittens, that I was simply a spectator in this unfolding story, but now it was evident she was relying on me. With a quiet effort, Mrs. Callahan got up from the porch and brushed off her knees. "She's lucky to have found you," she said. Yet, there was something deeper in her voice, an implication that suggested this wasn't mere luck. "But this won't be a walk in the park. Those little ones are delicate, and she's not in the best shape. If she can't nurse them, you might have to step in." I blinked, trying to process her suggestion. "Step in how?" She considered it for a moment, then looked at me earnestly. "Bottle feeding, every 2 to 3 hours, day and night." Panic shot through me. "You mean I have to feed them? Myself?" "Well, they certainly won't be ordering takeout," she replied with a touch of humor, then softened her tone. "You're not in this alone. We'll gather what you need, and I'll be by your side. But Daniel, if you decide to do this, you're all in." I turned to look at Willow, her weary eyes fixed on me, as if awaiting my decision. Whatever path I chose had to be decided now. The gravity of the commitment began to sink in, but before I could voice my thoughts, Mrs. Callahan was already on the move. "Let's go. We need supplies," she said, heading toward her car. "Kitten formula, bottles, blankets, and a heating pad. Do you have a box or something for them?" I looked at my porch, then back at her. "A box?" She let out a sigh, shaking her head. "You can't just leave them out here, Daniel. They're newborns. They can't keep themselves warm yet, especially with their mother in such poor condition. She won't be able to provide the warmth they need." I felt a tightness in my stomach as I looked at the small, delicate bodies huddled against Willow. Bringing them indoors felt daunting, yet leaving them outside seemed even worse. I rubbed my face in frustration and took a deep breath. "Okay, I'll find something." Mrs. Callahan gave a reassuring nod. "Good, I'll be back soon with what we need." As her car drove away, I stood there for a moment, watching the little family at my feet. This was no longer just about feeding a stray cat. It felt like I was stepping into a role I hadn't anticipated. Rather than overthinking it, I went inside. I rummaged through my house until I found an old storage bin. After lining it with towels, I hesitated for a moment before placing it on the kitchen floor. Ready or not, it was time to bring them inside. Willow paused at the doorway, her ears flicking as she watched the open entrance. I crouched down beside her and gently hovered my hand near her back. "Come on, girl," I whispered. "It's warmer inside." She didn't startle at my voice, but remained still, her body instinctively shielding her kittens, muscles tight with uncertainty. I had hoped Willow would trust me completely after I brought her babies here, but I realized that trust isn't instant. She had taken a chance coming to me, but crossing the threshold was an entirely different step. And perhaps I wasn't quite ready for that either. What if I made a mistake? What if I became too attached? Pushing aside my own doubts, I gently scooped up the kittens and placed them in the storage bin in the kitchen. The moment they were out of her reach, Willow's head snapped up. Her body tensed, and with a quick breath, she hurried after them, realizing they were vulnerable without her. She slipped through the door before I could fully process it, rubbing her cheek against the side of the bin to check on them. I let out a breath I hadn't known I was holding. She was inside, and so was I. The atmosphere in the house felt changed with them here, as if the silence had transformed. The soft rustling of tiny paws on the towels, the faint mews, and the gentle rhythm of Willow grooming each kitten settled into the background like a delicate heartbeat. It should have felt like a temporary fix, just a situation to handle before returning to normal life. Yet there was an undeniable shift beneath it all. The tiny creature's presence made my house feel much less empty. It was a realization that weighed on me, pushing against my mind, which insisted I didn't really have them here. Before I could think it through, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I sighed and pulled it out to check the screen. It was Mark, the last person I wanted to explain this to right now. "Hey," I answered, already preparing for whatever he was about to say. "Hey man, you at work today?" His tone was relaxed, but I knew he had a specific point he was getting to. I paused for a moment. No, something came up. There was a brief silence before I heard his scoff. "Wait, this isn't about that cat, is it? You're not seriously getting involved in this, are you?" I rubbed my hand over my face, glancing at the corner of my kitchen where Willow had made a nest with her kittens. Her body was still tense, even in sleep, showing the exhaustion as her chest rose and fell with deep breaths. I felt the weight of responsibility grow, but it was more than just that. There was something deeper I wasn't ready to face. "I didn't really have a choice," I muttered, but I could tell Mark didn't believe me. "You always have a choice, dude. What's your plan? Keep them? Just let your life revolve around a bunch of strays?" His words struck hard, not because I disagreed, but because he wasn't entirely wrong. I had convinced myself this was a temporary situation, but as soon as I welcomed them in, I had crossed a line. Maybe that line was crossed when I placed that dish of food on my porch. Mark let out a sharp breath. "Look, I get it, but you know how this plays out. First, you're just helping out, and then they're all yours. You need to decide what you're doing before it spirals." When the call ended, his words hung in the air. I wanted to believe I could still take control, that I could decide to take them to a shelter tomorrow and wash my hands of it all. Yet, as I sat there, watching Willow breathe and listening to the soft sounds of her kittens shifting in their sleep, I already knew deep down that wasn't going to happen. This had become more than something I could just walk away from. It felt permanent now. The sun had moved across the sky by the time I finally got up from my seat, its warm light pouring through the window and casting long shadows on the floor. Willow lay dozing in her bin, her kittens snuggled against her side, their little bodies rising and falling with her gentle breaths. I should have felt relieved that they were safe and warm, yet Mark's words lingered in my mind, bothering me like a persistent itch. I kept telling myself I was just helping out, that this was only temporary. But deep down, I realized I was trying to convince myself of something untrue. There was no easy way to distance myself from this situation. Not when Willow had picked me, not when I had started to notice the way her kittens moved in their sleep, or how her ears twitched when I approached, even with her eyes closed. A knock on the door pulled me from my thoughts. Mrs. Callahan stood there, holding a small bag of supplies. Her keen eyes took me in as soon as I opened the door. Without saying a word, she set the bag on the kitchen counter and began unpacking it. Inside were tiny bottles, powdered kitten formula, and soft blankets that smelled faintly of lavender. "You've got that look," she said, glancing over at the bin, like someone who's starting to realize how deep they are in it. I let out a dry laugh, running a hand through my hair. "I think I figured that out a while ago." She nodded, seemingly unbothered. "That's how it begins. First, it's about making sure they make it through the night. Then you start thinking about tomorrow, and soon enough, they become part of your life." She looked directly at me, her voice softening. "Are you sure you're ready for that?" I wanted to say I wasn't, that I was still trying to figure everything out, that this was just a short-term situation. But the words wouldn't come. The moment I had brought them in, I had already made my choice. The house settled into a quiet rhythm. The kittens stirred occasionally, stretching their tiny paws against Willow before drifting back into a peaceful sleep. The air carried the scent of fresh blankets and warm milk, blending with the gentle late-afternoon breeze that floated through the open window. I never really noticed how the sunlight spilled across my floorboards before, but now, as it stretched toward the bin where Willow rested, it felt like a spotlight revealing something important. They weren't leaving. Not today, or perhaps not ever. Mrs. Callahan lingered longer than I anticipated, gently guiding me through the basics of kitten care. She taught me how to keep them warm, the right way to mix formula in case Willow couldn't nurse, and what to do if I had to step in. Her patience showed her experience. She understood what lay ahead, even if I wasn't ready to recognize it just yet. As evening approached and she prepared to leave, she looked at me thoughtfully, one hand on the doorknob. "You know, she began, her tone steady. "I've seen many strays in this town. I've never seen her stick around for long, until now." I stayed silent. I didn't need to respond. She nodded as if my silence spoke volumes. "Well, I guess we'll find out what kind of man you are." Then she left, her words lingering in the fading light. I remained in the doorway long after her car faded from view, staring at the quiet street beyond my porch. This situation wasn't just about the kittens anymore. It was about me. Night enveloped the house, wrapping it in a heavy stillness. I sat at the kitchen table, an untouched cup of coffee cooling in my hands, the dim light casting long shadows on the walls. The storage bin, just a few feet away, was lined with fresh towels and the kittens nestled within, their tiny chests rising and falling in uneven rhythms. Willow curled around them, her tail draped over their little bodies like a shield from the world outside. I should have felt tired. The day had slipped by too quickly for me to grasp, but my mind buzzed incessantly. Mark's warnings echoed in my thoughts, reminding me how these situations often unfolded, how we convince ourselves it's temporary until it becomes a routine. Mrs. Callahan's steady voice cut through my racing thoughts, reminding me that this was bigger than just the cats. Who was I, really? I ran a hand through my hair, letting out a breath as I leaned back in the chair. I could still walk away. I could call a rescue, let someone else take over, and return to my usual life. Thinking about packing them up, especially while seeing Willow's cautious eyes as I carried her out the door, tugged at something deep within me. Then I heard a soft meow break through the stillness. One of the kittens stretched, its tiny body wriggling and its paw reaching out as if to grasp something just beyond its sight. I felt a lump in my throat. I rubbed my face, realizing how unreasonable my thoughts sounded. But as I looked at those little beings, so vulnerable and so tied to me, I understood. I couldn't let them go. Sleep eluded me that night. The house was quiet, but my mind was anything but settled. Thoughts swirled around, making the walls feel a bit closer than usual. I sat on the couch with my hands clasped and my eyes fixed on the storage bin just a few feet away. The fading light from the kitchen barely illuminated it, but I could still see Willow's chest rise and fall, the steady rhythm of life that now felt like my responsibility. This wasn't just about the kittens anymore. It hadn't been for some time now. I realized it was something larger, a feeling I struggled to articulate until now. For years, I had kept my life straightforward, avoiding complications and keeping everything at arm's length. Work, home, sleep, repeat. Yet in just 2 days, a stray cat had managed to open up something inside me, something I wasn't sure I could close again. Because now, I wasn't just dealing with a problem, I was faced with a significant choice. What troubled me more, the idea of keeping them, or the thought of losing them? The weight of that uncertainty pressed down on me. For the first time in years, I wasn't sure of myself. A soft rustling drew my attention back. Willow lifted her head, her green eyes meeting mine in the dim light. She was silent, but there was a moment of connection between us, an understanding, a decision. I already knew what that decision was. The moment lingered, silent yet charged. Willow's gaze remained steady on me, calm and expectant, as if she knew the answer before I did. The kittens stirred against her side, their little paws moving in their dreams, entirely safe in her warmth. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees, feeling the weight of this decision settle into something tangible. From the start, I had told myself this was temporary, that I was simply helping until I could find a better solution. I had come to terms with a hard truth. There wasn't a scenario where I could simply walk away. The idea of gathering them up, taking them outside, and handing them off to someone else had faded from my mind. My heart had already made its choice without my full understanding, shown in the way I had welcomed them, stayed up late listening to their soft breaths, and noted the way Willow's ears moved with every sound. Something within me shifted quietly, a realization that was both subtle and undeniable. As I reached out, my hand tentatively brushed against Willow's fur. She remained still, her eyes half closed before resting her head back down next to her kittens. The weight of the day's tension eased, and I found myself feeling something gentle and new. I let out a breath. "All right," I said softly, almost surprised at my own words. "I guess you're staying." The finality of that statement hung in the air. There was no way back now. The next morning, the house felt transformed. It wasn't just because Willow and her kittens were there. Something inside me had changed as well. The atmosphere shifted from the detachment I had grown accustomed to, becoming richer and warmer. Even the soft sounds of tiny paws moving against the blankets and Willow's gentle purring seemed more significant, while the sunlight flowing across the floor bathed them in a golden light. Standing in the kitchen with my coffee, I watched them. They were small and delicate, yet they had found their place here. This was their home, and I realized I was part of that now. Mrs. Callahan had been right. It all began with a small act, feeding a hungry cat and giving her a place to rest. Life often unfolds in unexpected ways, guiding us toward choices we didn't see coming until it was too late to go back. Perhaps that's how it works. Sometimes the things that change us choose us, not the other way around. Taking a deep breath, I set my coffee down and knelt beside the bin. Willow lifted her head to look at me, then stretched and gently placed her paw on my arm before sighing and settling back down. I realized I wasn't just caring for them, they were caring for me too. Life often surprises us, sometimes in ways we least expect. Have you ever made a small decision that ended up having a big impact? Or perhaps you found yourself in a situation where an animal or another person relied on you more than you anticipated. If that resonates, I'd really like to hear your experience in the comments. This journey might remind you of someone who is facing a tough choice or feeling uncertain about the next step. Sharing your story could inspire them, showing that sometimes even a small act can help us discover our own strength. After all, what we think we're saving might also be saving us. If you enjoyed this reflection, consider subscribing for more insights like this one. It's intriguing how the smallest moments can result in the most significant changes.